Thanks, Brooke. Thank you. So I started writing this memoir in 2003, which was really 8 full years after I had first left my religion, ended my 9-year marriage to my witness husband, and as a result of that was really shunned by everyone in that community, including all members of my immediate family. So obviously it took several years to finish my memoir and get it to this point where it's out in the world. And it's really in no small part to many people in this room, writing coaches, editors, writing teachers, publishers, and also dear friends here that kept encouraging me to continue. And so I just want to mention also the gift of being able to speak here for the first time about this memoir at Book Passage, because many of the chapters and sections were written in workshop in this cafe. So, very special place to me. The first thing I'd like to say is that I'm not against religion, and I'm not against the Jehovah's Witnesses and their beliefs. I think that that's really a valid spiritual and satisfying spiritual path for many, many people. It certainly was for me for the first 30 years of my life. And then I had this interesting experience on the doorstep. You know, I've been knocking on doors. Well, I started knocking on doors when I was 3 years old, but actually talking when I was 9. And so I was very comfortable with my spiel. And here I was finding myself in a conversation with a coworker, somebody that I really respected. And that conversation, which really takes place in the first 10 pages of the memoir, created an opening in me, this place where I could hear and experience doubt about what I was saying, these things I'd been saying my whole life. And I'm so glad that I listened to those doubts, that I gave them time, that I opened up to the possibility of looking at things in a new way. Up until that point, I had been an unquestioning true believer. And I organized my entire life around that belief. Many of you know that Jehovah's Witnesses don't celebrate Christmas or birthdays. I didn't celebrate my first birthday with candles until I was 35 years of age. And as you go older, we were discouraged from being involved in any extracurricular activities at school. So no dances, no dating, no football games. And of course, it's a religion that believes in an impending and imminent Armageddon. So that was another thing that I believed, that at any moment, Armageddon could come in a very literal way. We were discouraged from pursuing higher education. So I didn't go to college until I was in my 30s, after I left the religion. So it's an interesting way to grow up, because you're in the world, but not of the world. And in that experience, I can tell you, it must sound, and it was in many ways, a very narrow way, and it was very protected, because the people that I hung out with were not necessarily the people I worked with or went to school. It was my family and other people in that religion. I also just want to say, I'm really grateful for the way that I was raised. I had a lot of fun growing up. We did a lot of things, the normal activities of life, skiing, backpacking, hiking, going to movies, all of that. But I really did that mostly with people in my family and other people in the religion. So when I thought about leaving, I was really clear that I'd be leaving all of that, all those connections, that sense of belonging, that way of being in the world, that network of support. That if I left that, I'd be going off into the unknown without any of that available to me. So the first half of my book is really dedicated to that experience of first having doubts that challenge everything you've ever believed and thought, and grappling with that and really coming to the place where I knew that I had to leave that religion, like I had no choice. I really had no choice. And the second part of the story is about the process of going out into the world. Now going out into this world that I'd been taught to fear, or at least to be wary of, and really see and discover that how about that? A world that I was taught to fear is actually a wonderful place, actually filled with a lot of benevolence and a lot of possibility. It's possible to actually be safe in the world, to belong in this world outside of the Jehovah's Witness organization. But understanding that is a process that really took a lot of time. And while I'm not against the Jehovah's Witness faith, I do think that shunning a person is decidedly un-Christian. It's not the right way to treat people. Don't get me wrong, there are times when shunning somebody is appropriate, it has merit. You know, if somebody's in an abusive relationship or somebody is not acting in a way that's appropriate, not taking responsibility for themselves, there are reasons when shunning is appropriate. But I do not think that it's appropriate to shun a person just because you happen to have a different belief than them or view God or life in a different way. Witnesses see that as a scripturally sanctioned kind of tough love. But my experience of it was really like an experience of emotional terrorism. Really a very, very cruel. There's very few things you can do to another person that are more painful or cruel than shunning them, turning your back on them, ostracizing them. It's a very, very powerful way of motivating people, but I found that very, very manipulative. And I was not going to stand for being manipulated. Yeah, that was just not going to work for me. So first of all, I wrote this memoir for myself. Obviously, I've always loved writing, and writing it was a way for me to sort out my feelings and the experience that I'd had, and also like, what did I learn from that? What can I take away? And I will tell you, in just the under 3 weeks that this has been out, just having it out in the world, I've noticed this whole other kind of fresh level of completion around the story. It's almost like it's not mine anymore. I'm receiving emails, incredible emails from people who've read the book that are very touching. It's having the impact I had hoped for, and that it's other people who have experienced similar things are recognizing their story and mine. It's a universal story. We all have to leave home at some point, and in leaving and moving to the next thing or the next thing, we have to leave something behind. In my case, the things I left behind, the cost was really high. But still, it's a universal story. And so besides writing it for myself, I did want to write it for other people who were going through similar circumstances as a way to help them know you're not alone. I've been through this too. There's hope. There's a way through this to the other side, a place where life can actually be rich and grounded, and that it's not selfish to pursue happiness. I didn't know that when I was growing up. I always thought that was kind of a selfish, self-absorbed thing to do. But to realize that pursuing one's own happiness is actually a divine right. There's not anything wrong with that. But getting to that really takes time, getting to that space. And I'd just like to share with you an excerpt that takes place after I have really sat down with my family and we've had the conversation. We're around a table and I've explained to them I'm out. And it's very clear to everyone around that table that I am going to leave. This took place in Oregon. I was going to go back to my then home in Chicago, and I would be disfellowshipped, which is the word that Jehovah's Witnesses use for excommunication, and that we would not be seeing each other. It was in this conversation that my family let me know, as I knew they would, that they would not speak to me. And so it was a impassioned conversation. And so my big sister, 6 years older than me and not happy with me at all in this moment, asked me, so what is your hope for the future, Linda, and for conditions to improve on the earth if you don't have the truth, which is how witnesses refer to their religion as the truth. Lori pressed me, if you don't put faith in Jehovah or the kingdom, then what? Your job? Your bank account? Your health? Though I maintained a facade of confidence, inside I squirmed at these questions. I had no answers here, trite or otherwise. I was floating in a spiritual void where existential questions about God and spirit swirled about me, unsolved, a far cry from the certainty of my whole life up to that point, the same certainty Lori still had. Exposure to ideas like the Course in Miracles had created a new context for thoughts on love, heaven, and God. These were the types of questions that I could resolve only with time, inquiry, solitude, and a quality of faith that felt new and important to develop. I was uneasy about my lack of spiritual clarity, but I was willing to put in the time, trusting the answers would come. For now, I was happy enough suspending ossified beliefs about a jealous old Jehovah, an imminent Armageddon, and fixed ideas about what made a person good or bad. So that's the process. I'm really glad that I allowed myself that time to be in that space of not knowing and just say, I don't know. I just don't know. Do I even believe in God? And if I do, what kind of relationship do I want with him or her or it now? Just really filled with questions. And one of the paradoxical things that came out of this time was, of course, right after this, going into that period of initially being shunned by my family, not hearing from them, I have to admit, it was kind of nice. I had been getting calls, weekly calls from them. Please, could you go to the Kingdom Hall? Have you read it was a lot, and I was really drifting farther away and hiding a lot of my life and new friendships and relationships with them. And so there's this way of grappling with also the grief and but also like this incredible feeling of liberation and expansion that's happening because, man, I'm out. I'm out from under that. And I talk about that a little bit here with a chapter that starts with a quote from Mae West that too much of a good thing can be wonderful. And so massive waves of energy were freed up now that I was no longer hiding my life from my family. Like a spring held tightly in the hand, then released, I bounced through life loose and free. It was the middle of summer, time to party. I crammed the months with activity. I missed my family, of course, and in quiet moments I felt forlorn. But more than anything, I was giddy with the absence of their pestering. I believe the worst of the experience was behind me. The full scale of my loss hadn't hit yet. Little did I know how many heart-wrenching moments lay ahead. But early on, I made excuses for my family's behavior, as I had been taught to do. Hadn't I, through the years, shunned people who'd been disfellowshipped, turning my head, avoiding the gaze of former witnesses I passed on the street or in the store? I repeatedly told myself that my family had no choice but to do the same if they wanted to stay true to God and their religion. No matter, I thought, as I practically levitated from the freedom from having to please them, the elders, and angry old Jehovah. Those days had an urgency, as though I needed to swallow life whole and satisfy the pent-up and greedy hungers of my soul. So I decided to try everything that called to me, explore all ideas, and keep an open mind. Armageddon may or may not have been coming. I hadn't sorted that out yet. But I'd come this far, and I might as well have a good time. And boy, did I have a good time. I'm still having a really good time. But you can see the collision there. There's this point where there's this expansion, but you kind of know there's hell to pay still. And what about this Armageddon? When you're in this place where you're betwixt and between, that's often how we feel, right? When we're in transitions, what do I believe now? And in that still, that Armageddon, I don't think that's really happening, but what if they're right? And if they are, and Armageddon comes, as I've been taught that it was going to come, I was screwed. I probably was not going to be saved. So how do you get through something like that? I think it's a process of gratitude, this way of staying open and curious. For me, mindfulness and awareness were a part of this, also gratitude. And in just giving myself the space to do all of that, what happened was a new relationship with the divine started to emerge, and I feel is always still emerging, even in this moment. Just share this last excerpt, and then, maybe some Q&A time. After that, every escapade into the world held potential to touch the divine. And I should say I was living in Chicago at this point, which I think is one of the best cities on the planet. It certainly was a great, great place for me. Every escapade into the world held potential to touch the divine. I sat 10 feet from Ahmad Jamal as he pounded the ivories in a passionate tribute to Miles Davis and wondered how many angels were dancing on his shoulder. I shimmered and swayed with the crowd as B.B. King stroked Lucille and made her wail, lowering my head from time to time to sip a cold beer beneath a layer of smoke filling the bar. Walking through a Degas exhibit at the Art Institute, I was struck by his midlife transition from paint to bronze sculpture, drawn as he was by a strong internal directive, the call of spirit to shift to a new medium. Watching Aretha Franklin belt out respect in the summer breezes of Potrero Music Shell, I decided if there was such a thing as reincarnation, I wanted to return as one of her backup singers. There were lesser-known and esoteric attractions to enjoy, like Howard Levy's funky harmonica, Bella Fleck's jazz banjo, and the handmade jewelry and textiles on display in the street booths of the summer art fairs. Regardless of the venue, the degree of polish, or fame, I felt I was in the presence of something sacred, enjoying everyday life as a place of worship, a way to experience truth and beauty for its own sake. Had the world been like this all along, rich, full, and fascinating, and I had failed to notice? My heart mourned the 35 years I had spent waiting for God to bring paradise, when here it had been all along, right under my nose. So, yeah, I guess, the relationship with the divine is really what I hold. I really cobbled together, I think, what's a very esoteric, very rich spiritual life. It's very ecumenical and still forming. I've been thinking a lot about my mother in this period of time. She passed away a couple of years ago, but some of the hardest parts of this book to write involved my mother. Mother's Day is coming. Not that we ever celebrated Mother's Day, but I do think of her, and she was a very, very strong woman, and I really admire that strength. But what I realize is kind of a lineage in my family is very strong people, but how strength can be a real gift and a grounding, but there's a way that strength can move over into a way where there's a rigidity and a closeness. And when you get like that, what's possible? So I've been really curious about, and it's one of the things that's come out of this experience, how can I maintain the strength, the strength that I developed from growing up as somebody that was very different. How ironic that a religion that trained me how to be different, that training is really something that would allow me the strength to leave. But how can I keep that kind of strength while still having my heart be opened, where I can be soft and also curious? And that's kind of the question that I live with all the time. So,